Welcome, folks. We're going to get going in a minute. Just want to let people get settled and ready. Gretchen's here, which is terrific. It's nice to have on-time guests. Doesn't always happen, and so we appreciate that. And we've got a good show for you today. This is also one of those presentations, by the way, that you all can share with others afterwards if you thought it was compelling, and I think it will be. There's going to be a presentation, so it's easy to email it out, share it with others, invite Gretchen to come talk at events that you may be hosting. She's terrific. I've learned a lot from her, and I think you will too. So let's just wait another minute or so.
Great.
Got a good crew getting on today. I think you dragged some of your friends, Gretchen. Last night we got a few registrations that look like friends of Gretchen, and so that was good.
Thanks for joining, everybody.
Yeah. Excuse me.
Goodness.
In the beginning of spring every year in Washington, I have 2 or 3 days where I lose my voice and I'm overwhelmed, and I think that began about an hour ago. We're having a very warm day here. It's been a cold spring here in Washington. So, okay, Gretchen, you ready?
Yeah.
We're going to get going. Welcome, everybody. Simon Rosenberg here from NDN. This is one of our periodic touch-ins with people that we think are doing interesting work, whether it's policy, political, in the media space. It's been a really fun series of events we've done over the last couple of years with thought leaders and just people doing good stuff, and that we think deserves a bigger audience. And with me today is Gretchen Barton, somebody who I only met in the last year or so. She's the research director at Future Majority, which is an organization run by Mark Riddle. Mark was an old-time NDNer, was with us for many years. He's built Future Majority into a really interesting and important organization. I'm really proud of him. And Gretchen joined forces with him over the last couple of years to do research that is out of the ordinary. She's a social science researcher, not just a sort of democratic political hack. And the work that Mark and she have done together is in a space called deep listening. And I will tell you that I have been getting readouts on the work she's been doing over the last 9 months, and it's had a huge influence on my own thinking about where we are right now. And she now has a presentation that is also being released by Future Majority along with some new research, qualitative research, that sort of takes all of this work and tries to put it into something cogent for people in the center left to be able to use as we get ready to go out and make bigger arguments to the public. So Gretchen, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And folks, we'll go, with Gretchen, maybe 15, 20 minutes at most in presentation and some discussion. We're going to open it up for all of you to jump in then. And so Gretchen, take it away.
Awesome.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. This is a delight and a pleasure to share time with you. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today as well. So yes, as Simon mentioned, at Future Majority, we've been doing a lot of deep listening. We've been doing a lot of polls too, but we've been doing a lot of deep listening to really understand what's going on with Americans and why they think and feel and behave as they do. One of the things that I noticed as I was coming into the political world was that there was a lot of what that was surfacing. The kind of research that was being done was, what's going on? Do you want health care? Would you like your student loans forgiven? And it was wonderful, except that for me, at least, I was missing the why. Why are people saying they want racial justice? What does that mean to people? How do they see that in their lives? How does it manifest? In order to understand really how people think, feel, and behave. There are so many things changing right now in America today. And I think to really understand what's going on beneath the surface, to understand, you need to go deeper and look at those undercurrents that are influencing, the ways that people express themselves and see the world. This presentation that I put together is all about making Americans the hero of the story. And it is one of the things that I believe from all of the research that I've done over the past year and a half and even beyond that, I think it's one of the most important things that we need to do as people in the political space. And Recently, Joe Biden, at the end of the State of the Union address, he said, America is strong because Americans are strong. And I'll be honest, I don't know if you felt this way, but I completely lit up. I lit up because in this moment, Joe Biden was centering Americans as heroes. He was using the kind of language and the kind of frame that really resonates with Americans and all of the research that I've ever done. He was talking about them in a way that's in their DNA. Heroism, you see, is in the American DNA. I mean, one only needs to look at all the movies that we see about heroes, from the Avengers to Star Wars to Hunger Games to Band of Brothers. We talk a lot about Americans as heroes. And the story that resonates deeply with us as Americans is the idea of facing hardship, coming together through tough times and ultimately winning the day. And yet, our political messaging and our larger media culture does not center Americans as heroes. They often center politicians as heroes or policies as heroes. Or as villains, right? Politician Y is kicking a puppy, or politician Z is doing great things and showering manna from heaven. It's all about the politicians and the policies, where it really needs to be about the voter. And this is how our brains work. This is how we hook into these deeper ideas. We have to understand it through our own lens. And so centering the voter in word and deed is really critical. So some of the deeper themes that I've seen that are really important are thus. First, beyond Americans needing to be the hero, Americans need to see themselves in the future. The research that I've done suggests that Americans see their country at a tipping point, and they're afraid of the future. They're afraid of a lot of things. They're afraid of robots. They're afraid of cell phones. They're taking over their relationships. They're afraid of having ruined the earth and things being despoiled. They're very concerned that they don't really see a place for themselves in the future. And at the same time, they're hopeful that things might be better, that they might be able to connect with past generations and cultivate a better future. They see that it's possible that things could get better, but they're not really sure where they fit in. And so again, in centering Americans, it's all about talking about their role they have, how important they are, and how they can be a part of a heroic, important journey moving into the future. Without this, when Americans are afraid of the future, they look to conservatives. They look to conservatives for answers, and they say, I'm going to vote for the 50s. I'm going to go back because I know that story. If they don't know the story of the future, they're going to go to the past. So it's really important that Democrats talk about Americans' role into the future and how it's an important one for them. And you can see this demonstrated in some of our polling. Recently, we asked in a key Senate State Future Majority poll, where do you feel like you have control these days, if anything? And you can see here, Americans feel like they have a sense of control over their community, their kids, and as consumers, but they don't necessarily feel like they have a sense of control over their government and lawmakers. And so this really speaks to that idea of not feeling in control of this moment, of their government, or the future in general. Another thing, Americans want the government to be an assistant to their success. And here's what I mean. I have asked so many Americans about how they feel about the government, where they see government showing up, where they don't, where they feel like it's missing and they want it, where they feel like it's showing up and they want it gone. And ultimately, the answer keeps on coming back, that Americans want to be the hero of the story. They want the government to be assisting them, to be the heroic person that they want to be, with government clearing away barriers to success, clearing away barriers to success and opening up doors to opportunity. A lot of times we get confused and sort of think like, well, maybe the government can be the hero and save the day. That's not what voters want. They want to be the hero. They want to be the hero. And so it's really important that the government functions in that way and communicates in that way, that they are the assistant to helping Americans succeed, and that ultimately Americans are the ones that win the day. And right now, Americans don't feel that way. In a recent poll, we asked, how much do you feel like you matter in America? 65% of our participants said not so much or not at all. They don't feel like the hero. They don't feel like they're valued by their government. They don't feel like they matter at all in policies. And it's really important that we acknowledge that. And so to that point, Americans don't feel acknowledged, and they need to be. One of the things that kept on showing up in the research as I was doing these deep listening exercises, people kept on talking about how they paid their taxes, they showed up to work, They took care of their kids. They weren't out taking their clothes off in the streets and burning down buildings. They weren't breaking the law. What's up with that? And they were never acknowledged. This is a really deep psychological need that's showing up a lot these days. Americans need to feel acknowledged for the work that they're doing. For example, the Biden administration hasn't solved COVID. The American people have come together and solved COVID. Americans need to be given credit for the work that they've done, in collaboration, of course, with the government. But it's ultimately Americans who make America strong. It's ultimately Americans who make America great. And then here, Americans wonder if there's enough for them. Now, I do like pie, so there is a picture of pie there kind of intentionally, but in America, everyone wants a piece of the pie. One of the things that has shown up quite a lot in talking with voters is this idea of scarcity versus abundance. And a lot of Americans are in scarcity. Broadly speaking, a lot of white voters, suburban voters, people who have a piece of the pie already, they are saying that they want to make sure that whatever their forefathers had and their foremothers had, they want to keep it going. They want to make sure that they're playing on the same baseball fields as their grandpa played on. They want to make sure that the good times keep on going, that they can hold on to what's theirs. They're worried about losing things. Black voters, Latino voters, people who don't necessarily have as much, I'm speaking very broad brush here, they talk a lot about building wealth, about getting the government out of the way, making sure that redlining is out of their way, racism is out of their way, and making sure that they can just get theirs, get their own piece of the pie. And so there's an inherent tension baked in here, right? If the pie isn't big enough, right, someone's going to not get a piece. And so it's really critical that Democrats talk about things in terms of abundance, not scarcity. Everybody's going to get a piece of the pie. Not just some, not just this group versus another. It's really important to speak to the unstoppable potential of Americans, and how everyone can grow the economy. Everyone's going to have enough in America when Democrats are in charge. We asked about this in this way. We asked about what is more important for Americans when voting for a candidate. Is it more important to have a candidate who shows clear understanding of the problems my family or community face, or one who gives clear plans and makes promises for what they will do? And overwhelmingly, we saw it's a candidate who shows a clear understanding of the problems they and their community face. Now, I bring this up because it's really important, right, that we understand all of these different elements that are factoring in. You know, the sense of lack of control, the sense of needing a role in the future and not feeling it, the sense of wanting to be acknowledged. American voters want to know that they are heard, that they are listened to, that they are understood. And right now, they don't necessarily feel that way. So what should they be doing? A couple things, and so many more, but I'm going to keep it short. First, Democrats need to talk about things with the understanding that every American is an essential hero. Americans, some of them don't feel like they count. A lot of them don't feel like they count. They don't feel like they matter. They don't feel like they're heard by government. Every voter matters. One of the things that I have, it has been pounded into my soul is this idea that everyone was born at exactly the right time to take on whatever challenge we're facing and has an important role to play. Everyone matters right now in this American story, and everyone counts. And it's important that we convey that as Democrats to voters. Two, it's important to acknowledge the voter, what they're doing, how they're making America great, centering them and celebrating them. Three, telling them a story about an abundant future, right? This is all about the pie. We're not about, saying this person gets a slice and this person doesn't. It's all about everybody gets a slice of the pie. We are growing the pie. Americans work hard. We can do anything. We can get a man on the moon. We can make sure there's enough for everybody. So we need to show them a better future where everyone has enough and everyone has a job that can't be outsourced, right? It's all about abundance. And then the last point, wrapping it in the personal, because oftentimes Democrats deal in the abstract, and government in and of itself, because of the lack of control, can feel like an abstract idea. It's really important to wrap it in the personal. Talk about things in terms of what's happening on the ground locally. Talk about things in terms of stories, human stories, things that really matter to voters. Talking about what is happening with Americans and why they're important and what they're doing in the future, and how that kind of wraps up into the democratic vision for America. So I just wanted to share those key points with you. I definitely have more, but I think we can talk about that now. But yeah, thank you so much.
Gretchen, that was awesome, and thank you. And what I'd like to do is, if you want to turn off the screen share. Let's just
Yeah.
talk a little bit. I got a couple things I want to try to get out there, and then we'll open it up to our folks and make them the hero of our story today.
Yay, good.
So I have two questions I want to ask. The first one is, talk about this sense of distance that you have found between voters and politics, right? I mean, and again, maybe you can spend a little bit of time explaining what your deep listening technique is and how it's different from focus groups, for example, as a way of people getting an understanding of how this actually all works.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, what I do is something called metaphor elicitation. It's an in depth interviewing technique. It was developed at Harvard about 20 plus years ago. And what it does is it leverages the way that the mind works in order to reveal how people are truly thinking. We think in images, not words. And so, the process is all about posing a single question. You know, what are your thoughts and feelings about the Democratic Party? What are your thoughts and feelings about how the Democratic Party thinks about you? And I ask people to gather in metaphorical images that represent those ideas to me. Images are amazing as a way of conveying meaning because not only do they convey an idea on the surface, they're also, because of all of the different aspects of them, they convey an idea in a constellation of thoughts. So it's not just, I like healthcare. It's I like healthcare because this reminds me of how I felt when I was a child and I didn't have healthcare and my grandma came, and there are these deeper stories that we're unearthing and surfacing along the way, along with the emotions of things, along with the deeper sources of meaning. And so this process, it's a 90-minute process that I'll spend with voters. I'll talk to them about the images they brought in, and ask why they're important, ask about the emotions associated with them, and really get stories from the voters that are uninhibited, unfiltered, and really raw and emotional. This is very different from a focus group. A typical focus group, studies have shown voters get on average about 3 minutes to share their thoughts and feelings, where here it's 90 minutes. So it's a whole lot more. Plus, they're not around their friends or their new friends or acquaintances. So they're really unfiltered. They don't censor themselves. They just share however they feel. Sometimes it's offensive, sometimes it's amazing, sometimes it's everything in between. But people don't feel inhibited. And I always say that people go into the voting booth alone. And that's sort of the thing I think that we really capture here. We have that intimacy of thought that might not be shared in public elsewhere. So that's metaphor elicitation, and it surfaces a lot of really cool things that we're able to get. But so you were asking, though, about why people feel this distance with government and what's going on with that. One of the first points of data that I saw when I joined Future Majority was that on average it takes about 43 days for the government to get back to any voter that reaches out to them, which is crazy sauce. But as I went further and I talked to voters, one of the things that I kept on hearing was that they really had given up on the government. This feels terrible saying this, but they'd really given up on the government and the ability to get back to them. It was kind of like they were putting $1 in a vending machine and then kicking it and waiting for that Snickers bar to come out, and then the Snickers bar just never came out, and they were like, God damn it. But they did feel a sense of control, right, over their kids, over their community, over corporations, and their ability as a consumer to say, "Hey Nike, give me my sneakers," or "Hey company, I don't like this," and they'd get a response. They'd get a response back. So first of all, there is just no sense from voters right now that the government is necessarily someone that they can count on. So in many ways, they have shifted their focus to somewhere else. And also, because of the way that we are as Americans, our individual culture, our exceptional culture, we really believe that in freedom, Americans see themselves as these heroic figures that don't necessarily need anybody. Now, they absolutely do. They absolutely do, right? There are things that we need government for, and I'm not arguing against government, but they want to feel like they can exist without government. Kind of like that 13-year-old that goes off and is like, hey, I'm going to the mall alone. They want to have a home to come home to, and they want to be okay, but they want to feel like they're cool. And so it's really important in terms of the communication that government puts out and the way that it behaves, that it is there for the voter, but it is ultimately there to support the voter going off, leaving the nest, succeeding and conquering the world without feeling like they did it tied to their parents, aka government. So
I think one of the reasons I raised this is just in listening to you in some of the previous presentations. It really just reminded me about how people here in Washington often think that people are paying attention to them. And there's an assumption in our communication strategy that people are paying attention, people care, people respect us. And all of those things often are not the case. And it really dictates to me, it's one of the things that I think we're getting wrong right now as Democrats, which is there's an expectation that people actually know what we're doing, and that when we make a proposal that people understand it, like what happened with BBB last year, is that somehow there was this belief that even though people didn't know what we had done, they were somehow going to know things about things that we hadn't done. And I think we have to go back to school a little bit, as the political operatives in the Democratic Party, about people's real connection to this project of politics and government, and how alienated and distant they really feel from it, because I think it drives then a strategy for how we engage. And I do think that you said something I want to really, you and I are going to talk about this again, but this notion that when you're interacting with a brand now in America, you have, almost real-time interaction, right? There's a person and they email you back or they DM you or whatever, right? And you're negotiating with them. Whereas the government, it's this, as you pointed out, the Snickers bar never comes out. That's a fascinating thing that we need to think about, because it is absolutely true that there's been a revolution, particularly driven by COVID, right, in sort of this remote management of consumers. I feel it just in my own life, right?
yeah.
I mean, I just bought a car, and we built it, online, and I did it with my daughter, and we had a great time building a car together. And she even said this morning, like, Dad, that was so much fun,
Yeah. Oh
and
wow.
like we built our own car and we made our own choices. We went down and looked. Those kinds of things were not possible, right? 8, 10 years ago. And so part of modern marketing is that the consumer is involved in building the brand. You're engaged with the brand. You're connected to the brand. And you're helping actually make the brand. You're not a consumer, you're a participant in the brand itself. I think it's one of the reasons that, for example, going back to what Howard Dean did with Joe Trippi, you felt like you were part of that campaign. You were helping build the Dean campaign, right? And I think this idea of being a partner in the fight and not a donor to the cause, as I say, is so important to us. We treat Democrats as if they're donors, and consumers, they take what has to be given to them, as opposed to being participants in this thing called our country, our future, our democracy. And I think we've got a lot of learning to do here, or relearning, perhaps, again,
Yeah.
about all this.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I mean, I think along the way too, I think you were mentioning how voters don't really know what's going on. I mean, it's kind of a horror show out there. I mean, a little bit. I've talked to a lot of voters who, kind of say like, well, Trump passed $35 insulin and Biden's going to go to war. Just things that you hear and you're like, oh my God, that's really wrong. That is not correct at all. Right. But the thing is, they're still voting, and they're making decisions based on how they feel, not on what the facts are.
Right.
And so, giving them that voter experience or consumer experience is really important to be mindful of that. And also understanding that, government shows up for people in funny ways. And sometimes they're ways that are not really sexy. I ask people in the ethnographies that I do to take pictures of their community and their home, of where government shows up for them and where it doesn't, where they experience government. And my God, have I seen so many potholes. And that's not really a sexy idea, really, potholes, but, people see that, and where the rubber hits the road, they see, oh my God, government's not showing up for me. Look at that hole. It's been there for 25 years. It has never been fixed. Which is one of the reasons why, by the way, I'm so excited about infrastructure, because holy guacamole, this is an opportunity to fill those holes.
There's potholes and garbage cans, garbage collection. I mean, yeah, I could go. This is a long part of our business, and you're right. It's amazing how much those basic things really are. So one other question, and then I'll open it up, is optimism.
Mm.
Just reflect on that.
It's good. I mean, I think we should be optimistic. I mean, look, there are a ton of things that Democrats have done um, in partnership with the American people who are heroes that are incredible, right? The American Rescue Plan has been passed. The infrastructure bill, my God, has been passed. How? I don't even know with the circumstances that we live in, but it's been passed. I think that we have, as Democrats, a lot of things to be optimistic about. I mean, technology is zinging along, the economy is zinging along. There's a lot of great things. Um, but we need to remind people of that because they're not going to hear it from mainstream media. Unfortunately, they're not going to hear it. And in the 4 minutes that they pay attention to a week per week, they pay attention to politics. They're definitely not going to hear it unless they hear it from us. And the story has to be, I think, an optimistic one, right? Where they see the future. Because if we tell them the world is ending, they're going to believe the world is ending because no one else is telling them otherwise. We need to paint an optimistic vision for the future that includes Americans. And I think that that's a really exciting prospect. I think, Americans, when you look over history, they've done such incredible things. Have done such incredible things. I mean, I hope that our generation is worthy of the legacy that America has given us, and I hope that we make it even better for the next generation. But I think we have a lot to be optimistic about, and I'm really hopeful that we'll embrace the mantle of optimism and start telling stories that are optimistic and include Americans as part of that story.
Both Clinton and Obama were forward backward people, right? They viewed the world through forward and backward, which the 21st century for Clinton, Obama was literally talked about forward and backward. And I think that admonition I think one of the most powerful things I heard you say today to me that I hadn't heard you say before was about how if we're not presenting a positive vision of the future, then it's easy for people to go back. And that is in some ways so core to the entire everything that's happening in the West right now, and the rise of conservative politics or reactionary neo-fascist politics, whatever you want to call it, illiberal politics, is that there's a nostalgia for a past that was never really there to begin with, right? It's an imaginary past, and I call it Faded Glory. I think I'm going to start a podcast called Faded Glory, and because Faded Glory is the engine that's driving so much of Western politics right now, and the obvious antidote to Trump's pessimism and Orban's pessimism and Putin's pessimism is center-left optimism, right? It's the antidote to that, and I think we have lost that a little bit since Biden's election, and it's something we have to desperately regain in the coming months.
I agree. I agree.
Okay, let me go to Q&A. So folks, this, we're all Zoom warriors now. Raise your hand and I'll call on you. You can dive into the conversation, go to Q&A. Let me go to the first, David Winkler. Great question, David, by the way. Where do you think Trump and the attack on January 6th fit into the story for 2022? Asking of you to both project out a bit, knowing that voters aren't currently thinking about him January 6th as much as they might during the summer when the committee reports in. Great question, David.
Whew. Thanks, David. Wow. Where do you think that's going? I mean, I think, right now we're at a moment where we're negotiating the story of America. And we're thinking a lot about, is America a crappy country? Is it a good country? Is it one that's moving in the right direction or the wrong direction? Do we have a better future ahead or a worse future ahead? And how does that all fit into it? January 6th, in all of our research, people resonate with the idea that it was a crime. They understand it that way. That there was reckless behavior that caused that, and reckless action and reckless words that caused that to happen. The way that I see it is that America is trying to fulfill its original promise and trying to be better each time, and that the way that we get there is by banding together and going through hard things and achieving a brighter tomorrow for future generations. I think our potential is limitless, and I think that Americans deeply resonate with that idea. I think that January 6th was sort of an interruption, a scratch in the record to that story. It was a challenge to the idea of whether we should go forward or back. And I think one of the things that Trump did, I think Trump's greatest sin, so to speak, sorry, I'm former evangelical here, um, is that he took he divided us so much as a country. And I think that that is one of the things that makes America great, coming together and going through hard times together. That's who we are as a country. And he tried to elevate himself as a great figure, by dividing us, and kind of took away America's greatness. So I think it was sort of a challenge to America's story. In terms of how it plays out, I don't really know. Actually, Simon, do you want to answer that? I think.
No, I mean, we have other questions, and all that I'll say, just building on that, is that I do think we underestimate how much tribalism is antithetical to democracy. And in fact, the United States was really built as anti-sectarian. I mean, it was built, the whole concept of it in the 18th century was to allow Europeans to get away from these never-ending sectarian wars that had been playing out in Europe, and to create a place where you could be any religion and it wouldn't push people into corners, right?
Yeah.
And that's why religious freedom is actually the core founding principle of this country, and religious tolerance, really, right?
Right.
And I think, and if you think about that, that this country was founded as a antidote to tribalism and sectarianism,
Hmm.
because sectarianism can destroy democracies. It's more powerful than societies. It pulls societies apart, doesn't bring them together. Trump has instilled something so deeply anti-American into our psyche, which is this sense of tribe, and of which race is part of it. But I think like what's happening in Ukraine, for example, right now is not about race; it's tribal, and um, and so I think what's happened is that we do have this greater sense of, as opposed to us being Americans, we are something American. We are a tribe. We're part of a tribe. There's a greater tribal consciousness. This is extremely dangerous for us as a democracy, because tribe will trump, uh, democracy and country, as we've seen in so many other places and we know throughout history. And it's why I think that Democrats have to be not just optimistic and paint a picture of the future, but we have to do things that are programs that are universal, that help everybody, and not programs that help groups, because it reinforces tribalism. It reinforces what you were saying, which is you're taking some of the pie and you're giving it to somebody else. We're at a point where that stuff has become dangerous for us as a society. And so we have to find the antidote to the tribalism is really about things that benefit everybody. And I think it's, in some ways, I'm just speaking among friends here, I think it's somehow to some degree BBB went wrong last year and became harder to sell than we thought it was going to be, because it was reinforcing a sense of picking winners and losers and tribal outcomes. And I know this is very much against the sort of conventional wisdom, but I just think this kind of stuff is far more dangerous and present in our life as a country than we're all really willing to admit.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with, yeah. And one of the things that I've been doing is interviewing evangelical voters who voted for Trump in 2016 and voted for Biden in 2020. And I have been really struck by how many of them they made the move. They initially voted for Trump for so many reasons, economic, business sense, just needing to shake things up. But a lot of them talk about how they thought that Trump was going to bring the country together, which is wild, but they did. And in 2020, they talked about this gaping wound that had been inflicted upon America by Trumpism, and how there was a deep wound and a deep pain that they felt, having been a part of that, but also really wanting to see America come back together, and wanting to see politicians take the first step in really bringing the country back together. So, yeah.
Let me go to Bill. Bill, who, by the way, we were talking about young voters before we got on. Bill McLean, who's runs a group called Clean and Prosperous America. I did a lot of work with them in the last cycle on young voters, and particularly non-urban youth, which was sort of a fascinating
Wow.
part of the demographic pie. Bill writes, love this work, this presentation. He's a marketer, so I'm sure that he's connected to this. I'm interested to hear more about core values and identities on the left, especially among young voters.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, um, in terms of some of the things that I've seen in young voters, and I haven't
Gretchen,
recently.
can you speak up just a little bit?
Oh, yes, I'm
Yeah,
so sorry.
okay.
I'm used to kids sleeping around me, so I always
Yeah.
have this pseudo whisper going on. Um, but yeah, in young voters, I think one of the things that they're talking about is wanting to make sure that they have a future. It's kind of basic, but it's really important. My most recent study of young voters happened in Texas, where they talked a lot about hustling and wanting to make sure that they were able to get a piece of the pie. They wanted to build wealth for themselves. They wanted to achieve. They also talked about their worries and their fears that the government wouldn't invest in them, wouldn't invest in their own future, and they felt like they wanted to see that investment in terms of education, in terms of action on climate, in terms of just positioning, messaging to include them as part of the story. I think young voters are beautiful things. They want to see a better world. They're not a monolith, of course, but I think they absolutely need to be attended to. Their values are not so different than anyone else's. They just want to make sure that they have a future and that they have a government that is thinking of them in their own future. That it's not just about other groups.
Let me go to Alex. And how do you suggest we deal with voter concerns around inflation, which tend to emphasize the powerlessness of consumers, voters to control their own economic status?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that we did at Future Majority when I first came on was do a big study in terms of how people perceived Democrats and how people perceived Republicans on an unconscious level. And one of the things that we found was that people really see Democrats as the people that throw the money into the air or throw the money down a hole like confetti. They spend. You get a car, you get a car, you get a car. Which is kind of great if you're the one getting a car, but not really. They want to know that their money is going somewhere, that they are putting the dollar in the machine and that they're getting back a Snickers bar. And I think one of the things that Democrats really need to counteract is this deep perception of spending and just being profligate with the money. But it's also about leaning into the language of investment. I don't um, I don't really know that the Biden administration can throw coupons out in the air for American voters and make life cheaper. There's a lot to it, but I think it's really important that the administration talks about what they are doing to make life more affordable for Americans, so Americans can succeed, while also talking about the incredibly important investments they have made in Americans. Um, I think the language of investment is really critical at this time and just generally for Democrats because Americans tend to see themselves in that way, that our greatness comes from our productivity, that our value comes from that. And talking about how Americans can reap the benefits of the economy. They need to feel like they're investors at the table, they're shareholders of the American economy, and that the money that's being spent right now is being invested in them, in their future, and their success, sort of assisting their success now and into the future. Um, Simon, would you like to add to that?
No, I mean, it's your take. And yeah, no, that was great. And I do think, no, I'm going to resist. I've been fighting with all sorts of people on Twitter today about all these things. So I'm a little amped up. I never engage with trolls and with Republicans, and I did today, and it's been awesome. And feel very empowered. So thank you. We have no other questions, so let me just ask one, and then Gretchen would just, any final thoughts or anything we didn't really cover. And I just want to reiterate that you can share this presentation with others. You also can invite Gretchen and Future Majority to speak at, to your own gatherings of people. This is really important work because I think it goes to, I grew up in politics as a field organizer. And I was a TV producer and writer for ABC News, but when I went into politics as a lowly guy, I went in, and so my connection to the business was out being with voters, right? I like lived and what was incredible to me working in presidential elections early on was how people would come into your office to volunteer to go, and the level of hope, the power of their hope and their desire for this campaign, this presidential campaign, and you, this little connection to that campaign, to somehow make their lives better, was just, it was overwhelming, right? Sometimes as a young person, the kind of uh, not desperate. It's not, the word's not desperate, but sort of just the intensity of the belief and hope that things were going to get better. And I felt extraordinary responsibility for that, right? In my and really was honored. And I think, thank God, I spent over 2 years of my life on two different presidential campaigns working in communities, working with real people, not just doing communications or polling and all the abstraction of this, but being actually out with people in a campaign that mattered to them, right? A presidential campaign, which in this system, it matters the most. And, as it goes down, it matters less. And so I do think that we, as somebody who's been now in Washington for 30 years, it's hard to believe, I think we've lost our connection to this stuff a bit, to this sensibility of hopes, dreams, aspirations, the fact that most people think we're all full of shit here, frankly, which is something that nobody in Washington really is ever really willing, excited to admit that, they sort of see pox in both their houses. All you guys are kind of corrupt and all that stuff that you hear all the time. But yet the counter to that, Gretchen, as you said, is this overwhelming hope that somehow like we're going to get our stuff together here and make things better for everybody, and that they're not giving up, but that they're also chastened. I mean, they're not also gonna, go follow, I'm not getting my hopes up about the Nationals this year. I mean, there's a sense that like I want things to be better, but I'm also not going to go get emotionally connected to it. And I think that we've lost some of the emotional piece of all of this in our business here. And it's not about legislation, it's not about government, it's about this common journey that we're on. We live in the most remarkable country in the history of the world, and we're part of the most important political party that's ever been. This sort of this sense of greatness and power and opportunity. I mean, I keep coming back to this word opportunity for you, like what I keep hearing. And I think Biden's head is there. And we just got to, I mean, part of what I hope all this work does is help us, get reconnected back to the place that we need to be. And it's not a place that we're all that far away from, but we're not there now. And we have to acknowledge that. And we've got work to do to get there. And so, Gretchen, let me just say, why don't you just, take it wherever you want to go, whatever you didn't cover, any exclamation points you want to put on anything.
Yeah.
Why don't you bring it
Yeah.
home for us?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, we're living in a really interesting time. I'm grateful to be alive right now. And also, oh my God, what's happening tomorrow? But I think that, we do have a great opportunity to connect with voters on a deep level. By listening to them and understanding their stories. In this journey that I've been on listening to American voters, I think there have been times that I have just I've been delighted, I've been tickled, I've been admonished. I've learned that Nevadans are conspiratorial, that Floridians see Governor Abbott as a father figure, which is kind of weird but cool. And North Carolinians really love their dogs. A lot of random tidbits of information I picked up along the way, but there is this incredibly interesting common story that Americans have about, wanting to be connected, to be part of a bigger legacy, whether it's the American legacy or their own familial legacy. They want to be part of something that's bigger than themselves. And they want to be part of something that's great. Not to be all MAGA in here, because I'm not, but to kind of talk about that, to be a part of a great story. They want to have meaning and resonance in their lives. They want to be told that they are good. Rev Rob Lee is a friend of mine. He's a descendant of the original Robert E. Lee. And one of the things that I talked to him about a couple months ago was, what the hell do we do with CRT? How do we talk about things? And he was talking about how sometimes people are told. It's a longer story, but one of the things that he underlined for me is, from the pulpit, he believes that it's really important to acknowledge and see people for the goodness that they have and that they hold, and that a lot of people who embrace Trumpism really were told that they were crap from the beginning. It's a longer story, but the essentialness of acknowledging Americans as being good, as doing good, as being part of a great story, I think is more important than ever. And talking about how we can take that story forward, right? It's not a story that ends with them or ends with this thing going down. It's all about where we're going into the future. And Democrats are in charge right now. We have the opportunity to tell this story, to give them a sense of the future, and to give them a sense of how they have an important role to play. Everybody matters, and I'm just really excited to see how the Biden administration takes that moving forward. So.
And I'll conclude by saying, when I went to go work for Bill Clinton at the end of 1991, early 92, one of the things that I really learned was that, Southerners are storytellers. Storytelling is far more ingrained in the culture of the South than it is where I grew up and in the Northeast. And Clinton's capacity to tell a story and to see the world through stories, right, was so it was very informative. It informed my entire understanding of this business, right, in a very powerful way. He was a phenomenal storyteller. There are always people that he would talk about that he met, and he would, whenever he talked about a policy, he'd say, I met Mary here, and Mary, this is the way it manifested, right? And he always was a phenomenal storyteller. Obama was a great storyteller in a different way, right? Like, he wrote books and he understood stories, and I think Biden is a legislator, and he's not as much a storyteller, even though Irishmen often are great storytellers, right? I don't know. I've got a whole huge Irish part of my family, right? And they're great raconteurs and storytellers. I think that we're too rational in some ways right now. It's too much. There's a nail and a hammer. I got a hammer, and we've got to find more joy, more optimism, more greatness, more celebration of this. Right. How lucky we are to live in this incredible place, and I know I feel that every day. And I think we've lost a little bit of that in the grind of the last year and a half, the brutal COVID, Ukraine, the unbelievably craziness of a Republican Party that's nihilistic and doesn't want to, it's very difficult to work with. Somehow, despite all that, Joe has got to rise up and do exactly what you've said, which is to make Americans the hero of the story. I think we had some success with your, during the State of the Union, which is stuff we helped feed into the State of the Union process, and some of it came back out. It was kind of cool to see, Gretchen. Yeah. And I'll say that Gretchen in this work and I and a few others sort of pushed a bunch of this stuff into the State of the Union process. And I think some of this stuff did come out the other end. But we got to keep it going. And it's not so much about policy, it's about us as a people and how Democrats are helping people achieve their own. Bill Clinton always said, why did you run for president? He said it's to help people live up to their God-given potential. And that was actually why he was in politics. I mean, it was actually who he was, and it animated every day. Anyway, Gretchen, thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Your memo is out, right? The memo that goes along with this presentation is out. It can be found on my website, but also Future Majority site, right? Do you want to just explain where people can go connect with this work?
Absolutely. They can go into the Future Majority website. I can give some links now, or we can send out an email later, but fmresearchhub.org has a whole lot of it. Futuremajority.org as well has them as well. So both of those spots are good places to access.
Thanks, Gretchen. Thanks, everybody. Go fight, win. Gretchen, keep up the great work.
Thanks. Take care, guys. Bye.